Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're just going to give it about 30 seconds and let people join, and then we'll get started. All right, I know we have a lot to discuss today, so we'll go ahead and kick it off. Welcome to our webinar on workplace ergonomics. My name is Alex Smith, and I head up marketing for Citation Canada. I'm joined today by my colleague, Erin. Erin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Appreciate it, your time. Thanks for coming here today. So my name is Aaron Georges. I'm one of the health and safety consultants at Citation Canada. Been in the field of health and safety for roughly 13 years, coming on 14 next year. Feels like I'm aging myself, but been in this for quite a while. Different industries I've been involved with. Logistics and transportation was the bulk of my career. Spent some time in the paper industry and heavy industrial manufacturing settings. So hopefully I can pass off as much as I can to you today. And I know for sake of time, like Alex mentioned, we got 30 minutes and there's lots to cram in here. So I think we'll just get started here.
Perfect. Thanks so much for that, Erin. And yeah, just some last housekeeping items before we jump into it. We will be recording today's session, so we'll share that out to all of you in the next day or two so you can revisit it or you can share it with your colleagues. Please do feel free to ask questions via the Q&A functionality here in Zoom. We've also collected some questions through the registration form. You may have submitted one, so we're going to aim to get to as many questions as we can at the end of today's session, time permitting. And just a little bit about Citation Canada, in case this is your first time joining us. We're a Canadian headquartered software and services company. We specialize in HR and health and safety management and compliance. We've been helping thousands of businesses across Canada to keep their teams safe, engaged, and set up for success for over 15 years. We help organizations like yours navigate the complexities of compliance and build great workplaces. And today's topic is ergonomics. We've got a lot of information to share. As we've said, we'll start with an intro to ergonomics, then we'll get into how ergonomics are applied in today's workplaces. And that includes hybrid and remote work scenarios. And then we'll end with some best practices for all small and medium employers. So with that, Erin, why don't we start with a quick overview of ergonomics and some of the key definitions so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, for sure. I think before we get into definitions, it's important to maybe just go over where we've come over the last, honestly, hundreds of years when it comes to ergonomics. This goes back all the way to ancient Greece, right? They're designing tools as far back as 400 BC to do jobs and in workplaces where they're considering some ergonomic principles that we even consider today. And then hundreds and hundreds of years go by where, as time's gone on, and this, no one intended for ergonomics to address worker well-being when it initially started. It was mainly to address productivity, but unintentionally they realized that injuries are going down, like injury rates are reducing, and worker well-being is increasing. So it was kind of a trade-off effect that happened. It was just a runoff effect of them trying to work more efficiently, until we get to World War II, where now they're starting to see the effects of being in these very difficult working conditions and how important it was for them to have cognitive function, when they're doing certain things, you can imagine. And that was at the very most there. It was now considered as essential. Like, they have to consider cognitive function as essential to the success and failure of whatever it is they're going to do. And very shortly after this, the term ergonomics is actually adopted by the first governing body in the field, professional body in the field. We call them today as they're known as the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. And then the last 50 years is when it's really been refined, and the understanding and interest has gone way up as more published studies and books have been written over the years. And in the last, I would say the last 20 years, 20 plus, we've shot up with office jobs, sitting and reliance on computers, to where, we're now in a different era of history, putting us in a new chapter altogether. So we're at a very new marker in that timeline of history. And to give you an idea, so we're going to be going through a few things today. Ergonomics is the main topic, so we should define what ergonomics are before we move forward. And that's the science of matching a job to the worker and a product to the user. And this is done through completion of assessments, and those assessments consider posture of the worker, repetitive movements, forces applied, and there's other potential physical and environmental factors that would impact the worker's ability to do their job safely. On the cognitive side of things, it's more specifically how the brain performs and is impacted in relation to human machine interaction, mental workload, decision making, work design, and training. And lastly, I want to define workplace, because one of the big topics we're going to get into today is related to hybrid and remote work scenarios. And so I want to define that for you. This is coming right from legislation, and a lot of what I'm referencing is based on Ontario. That is where I'm based out of, but it's shared across legislation in different jurisdictions. So workplace means any land, premises, location, or thing at, upon, in, or near which a worker works. And a workplace could be a factory, office building, and noted in the same legislation, a private home. So even your home, consider like an office, home office is considered a workplace. So it's important to note that.
Yeah, and we are going to come back to that last point about this kind of new variable of home office ergonomics and hybrid and remote workers. But first, let's talk about why employers should care about ergonomics. So there's obviously a few reasons. What are they, Aaron?
Yeah, absolutely. Right at the top of it, let's go with the most important one, and is that you are legally obligated and required to do your due diligence as the employer. So that means that hazards related to poor ergonomics, they have to be treated the same as any other workplace hazard. And this is written in legislation. So again, I'm referencing Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act, but this is written in other jurisdictions, similar wording, but it is written the same way. And that is the employer is required to take every reasonable precaution in the circumstance for the protection of a worker. And like I said, it's written across multiple jurisdictions that way, so it doesn't change. That is the requirement. And this means that because it's the same as any other hazard or risk in the workplace, you have to recognize and identify those things. You have to assess them, and you have to eliminate and control. And when you don't do that, it leads to things like musculoskeletal disorders, which is on the traditional ergonomic side of things. And then it could lead to, on the cognitive side of things, burnout, which I will get into those things moving forward here. So on the traditional side of things, you're thinking common sprains, strains, pulls, muscle tightness. It could progress to long-term disability, pain, limited movement, things like that. And on the cognitive side of things, when you reach the point where you've reached cognitive overload that leads to burnout. Burnout is considered phenomenon that's resulted from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. And that the kinds of effects you're looking at there when you reach a point of burnout, emotional, mental, physical, all of which are quality of life impacts, right? So headaches, fatigue, anxiety, and depression can be a factor. Reduced efficiency in the workplace or in general, reduced ability to feel and process your emotions are all possible effects of this. And that's not it, right? How does this affect employers as well? I mean, financially, there are impacts, and I don't spend too much time on the financial impact because the well-being of the worker really should be at the forefront. But there are some significant impacts financially when you're considering direct and indirect costs involved with workers' lost time. You're looking at somewhere between $150,000 to $250,000 per worker that's involved here, right? And that's between premiums that need to be paid by the WSIB, wage supplements paid out by the employer, indirect costs, like you may have to hire a new worker. You have to now train that replacement worker. There's administrative costs that are associated with investigating injuries or becoming compliant. Now you have to make changes and pay for that worker's recovery and things along those lines. So the impacts are pretty substantial. And honestly, for small to medium-sized businesses, this is particularly detrimental to your growth and sustainability. Again, not from just a financial standpoint, but when you haven't recognized these impacts that I mentioned and identified your gaps and put your controls in place, you're leaving the door open for recurring injuries and negative impact on your workers' long-term well-being. How can you be sustainable and see growth in your workers, and and when they can't stay healthy and on the job and working effectively, it's just not going to happen. So definitely need to pay attention to what we're talking about today and try and apply it as best you can.
For sure. All great points, and probably why a lot of folks are on with us today. So yeah, ergonomics certainly applies to all kinds of work. You've mentioned already some different scenarios, different positions, but given that the average adult now spends 50 to 70% of the day sitting at work, so it's from a range of studies, somewhere between 50 and 70%. There's definitely more to it in the modern application than repetitive motions, like you mentioned, or your position. Those were a big focus from the last century. But what do you think of that stat, Aaron, and what does it mean for the modern ergonomics applications?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's pretty mind blowing, to be honest. I mean, it's almost common sense. Like you've kind of seen with all the technology that we've been flooded with, and just the shift is almost noticeable, really, to most people. But seeing that on a screen represented is pretty mind blowing, and I just think it shows that we've changed. The workplace has changed. Have we addressed the new set of concerns and risks and hazards involved with that change? That's up for debate, right? And that leads me to the next point of where we're talking about cognitive ergonomics and that being a big topic of discussion today. It's in its infancy stages, and it's directly affected by these numbers, right? That 50 to 70% of us sitting at work, most of that's going to be office jobs that require a lot of data to be processed and for our brains to be working in overdrive. And because it's in its infancy stages, there's big room for improvement and very little understanding at the moment. But what understanding we do have, you guys should understand this so that you can apply it as best you can now. And as we progress in this new stage of history that we're in, you can follow along. And so again, understanding these impacts and that can assist with you making that interaction between your workers and your systems more compatible with their cognitive abilities and their individual limitations. Right. So coming back to cognitive load, I have mentioned that already. So Alex, if you want to show them the next few things here. Yeah. So there are three types of cognitive load, and this refers to the amount of information that a person's working memory is processing at any given time, and how the intake of that information can negatively impact cognitive capacity. This plays a huge role in how people make decisions and overall perform in the workplace. And so the three types of cognitive load you see on your screen are intrinsic, meaning inherently difficult tasks and or information that's difficult to process, like completing difficult calculations on the fly. They're intrinsically difficult, inherently difficult. Extraneous, meaning additional mental strain due to improper design or instruction. So think of a control panel with no labels, or a button layout that doesn't align with the training materials that were provided to the worker. And then germane, meaning the effort that's exerted when you're trying to create a permanent store for knowledge, also known as learning, right? To put that one simple, it's learning, which in and of itself is, puts a lot of strain on somebody, especially if they're learning something new, right?
For sure. And I think a lot of us have thought about the outcome of cognitive load, like generally, but we haven't really considered that there are different types of it that might affect us differently. So that's really interesting. And clearly these present or come from different things. And what do they come from in an average work scenario?
Yeah, so that's it's a good segue, because I do want to talk about how you can maybe recognize these, how they present in your own processes and in your workplace, just so maybe that you can hone in on which things, like what are we doing that might be putting this cognitive load on our workers, and how can we make that a little more match that a little better with our individual worker needs. And that's information overload, right? Workers are often facing a constant stream of information, like emails, notifications, live data constantly being shown to you or that you have to pay attention to. All of that can lead to cognitive overload if it's not recognized and managed. Multitasking, while it's often looked at as a very important and necessary skill for the job, it can often lead to cognitive load, again, overload, and reduced overall productivity. Complex tasks, they require a significant amount of mental power that can also contribute to that overload. Learning new processes or technologies, as we mentioned, that germane load, that can temporarily increase cognitive load as the employer learns to adapt to new things that they've learned. And work that requires sustained attention without breaks, that can constantly consume mental energy. And we've shown you a good amount of examples that you can imagine all of those compounded on each other that can drive somebody a little up the wall and again lead to burnout. So this takes me to cognitive overload, right? And we've talked about overload. We've talked about it a couple times already, but what is it? And that happens when we try to process more information than our minds can comfortably handle. And that can worsen when you consider external stress. And as well, a busy, fast-paced work environment. If that's just inherent to the job, right, that can make those external stresses and the internal stresses even worse. And when we're overloaded, we're way less effective at what we do. This can cause workers to freeze up and not even know where to start, and they can miss important details, critical details in what they have to do. And that leads to burnout, which can be hard to recognize, not to mention from work from home roles where it's difficult to monitor a worker ongoing. There are ways to do it, but it is difficult to recognize. There are things that you can look out for, and I'm going to get into a couple of those things right now. So first off, there are physical, mental, and emotional signs that you're looking for as the individual. So headaches, changes in appetite or regular bodily functions. So think your stomach and digestive issues that can present, sleep problems can pop up, anxiety or depression, difficulty processing your emotions or information, as I mentioned, irritability, fatigue, particularly in areas where that wasn't the case before. Right. And in the workplace, that can present in different ways, like slower response times, impatient aspects of the job that they normally weren't impatient with before. You're making more mistakes than usual. You're missing deadlines. You're calling out sick frequently. Those are patterns that you can recognize in the workplace, and at the very least can spark a conversation between you and a worker, or as the worker between you and the employer.
Yeah, so that's been a lot about cognitive ergonomics, and I know that there's a lot to it, but certainly there must still be some traditional ergonomic issues to consider. So can you talk about that a little bit?
For sure. So on the traditional side of things, year after year, musculoskeletal disorders, so again, your common sprains, strains, things like that, are the #1 lost time claim reported to the WSIB. And related to office work, these are things like chronic neck, shoulder, back, wrist pain from prolonged sitting with little support or incorrect postures. It could lead to carpal tunnel, tendonitis, arthritis, and just your general pulls, tears, strains, sprains, those kinds of things as well. And what you're thinking is most common, the most common types of office-related ergonomic risk, pretty similar to in general industry otherwise, but repetition, in this case, like mouse movements, keystrokes that we have to do ongoing, note taking that you might have to do. Traditionally, like in a general sense, moving bundles from one conveyor to the next multiple times a day, shoveling, lifting, so repetition. Awkward postures, like looking back and forth between monitors or looking down to view a monitor, overreaching to use a mouse or a keyboard. Right. To relate that to general industries as well, doing any movement in a posture, basically that puts additional strain on your body. For instance, if you have to carry loads with your arms above your shoulders, away from your body, twisting at the waist with a load in your hand, maybe bending at your waist versus with your knees, these are the kinds of things you need to consider. And then in the case of office work, static forces is another thing to consider here, where you're staying in the same position for prolonged periods of time, like again, staring at your monitor for a prolonged period of time or being in a seated position all day can really put some strain on the worker. Now, I've already mentioned some cognitive effects. I want to get into some signs and symptoms to look out for on this front, which would be like pain, burning, numbness, tingling sensations, tightness, limited mobility, and all those things really present when you've been sitting for long periods of time, for sure. And then think about staring at the screen for as long as some of us may have to for our jobs. Eye irritation, strain, dry eyes, blurred vision, redness, right? These are all things that definitely can present. And if this is both, you can recognize these things as the employer as well, but for the individual, definitely keep an eye on these things. And there are some that are shared, right? They're shared between cognitive and traditional. Sleep problems, anxiety or depression, difficulty processing those emotions or information. Those are shared between cognitive and traditional. So it's not just a one shoe fits all. There's some that they're shared and compound on each other to make them worse.
For sure. Sorry about flicking the slide a little too fast, but
No worries.
I know we want to get into some mitigation measures as well. So hopefully nobody's feeling their eyes burning just yet into this webinar, but let's talk about what workers and their employers can do to mitigate the risk of ergonomic challenges.
For sure. Yeah, believe me, this could be a 2-hour webinar. So there are a few ways cognitively, for sure. We want to focus on cognitive at first. So time management, right? You can imagine how time management plays such a big factor here. As the individual, it's important to factor in breaks, right? Every 20 to 30 minutes, taking a break, a thinking break. So get outside for a short walk if you can. Open a window if possible. Get some fresh air, get some sunlight. If you don't have access to those things, of course, just stepping away from your screen for a small amount of time. And I'll get into one of the methods you can do this in a couple minutes here. But that is important. Take breaks, right? Time blocking. So set specific time slots for different tasks, right? So make sure that you know what you're doing through the day. So you're not spending time jumping back and forth and confusing yourself. It's important to set specific time to do what you need to do. Right. And it's the same considerations as the employer. Make sure that you're building this into your workers' day-to-day tasks and function, right? Just be aware that these things do help and that you should build this into the way that your workers work. Improve project management skills. So grouping similar tasks together so you're not switching from one task to the next that's unrelated. And now you're having to change the way you're thinking for one thing versus the other. It's a good idea to group the tasks together that are around the same topic so that you can complete those together and be on the same track, right? Try not to overload your day with all of your high effort tasks or long periods that may require concentration. Try and space that out over a longer period and always account for your breaks. Don't wait for fatigue. Prioritize your tasks in a way that gives you room to veer off the course. And as the employer, try your best to account for this when you're creating your safe operating procedures or SOPs, or otherwise planning the workers' day-to-day operations. Use available technology, right? We are at a point in history where AI is a big deal, right? Integrate AI into your tasks if possible in a way, so that it takes away from tasks that require significant processing power. Give that to AI to handle, right? Use equipment including software that considers ease of use, right? And as the employer, consider providing those kinds of tools. And don't be afraid to use your availability status changes, right? I know people look at that as something it's up to the user, but at the end of the day, I know for me, changing my status to out of office or I'm going for a break just to, it switches something in your brain. Like I'm not at work right now. I have a second to breathe. So even just doing that small status change on Teams or Outlook or whatever you're using is a way for your brain to disconnect. As the employer, providing training on things like workflow management, emailing, or other relevant topics to your industry would also help. And use things like SharePoint, Google Docs, or other project management software to help you streamline your workflow. Okay, and optimizing training is important. As the employer, you want to progressively step back as learners gain confidence, right? So it's not just training people, feeding them information, and then I hope they do well. It's really like have a look. How are they gaining confidence? Are they getting more proficient in what you're training them in? And if they are, start to let off the gas pedal a little bit and let them pick up a little more on their own. And use a combination of different techniques and strategies for teaching, right? We're not all just, visual learners, or we're not just book learners, right? Some of us respond better to visual, auditory. Hands-on is a big thing these days, is where a lot more of us are hands-on learners. And that's just to account for the different learning styles that you might have. And last one on just on the side of cognitive, as the employer for improving workplace design, it's important to try and locate an area where workers can work quietly with less distraction, lighter tools, lower vibration tools and equipment, ergonomic furniture that reduces physical strain, proper lighting to minimize eye strain, clear labels and signage that consider placement, visibility, cleanliness, and applicability to avoid confusing the worker. And one that I really think is important, and I'll leave it here, is job rotation. Job rotation is huge. If you can identify that this job has, 1, 2, 3 of those different cognitive loads that you've recognized, it's a good idea to say, all right, well, we're going to have someone work on that job for, let's say it's 2 hours, and then we're going to bring someone else in to give that person a mental rest, so someone else can come in and take over that job for a bit, and just gives all those workers a bit of a break, a cognitive break, when those tasks require a lot of cognitive load and cognitive attention. And now getting into traditional, right? On the side of office, correct postures, which we are going to get into at the tail end of this. Equipment options like adjustable height equipment. So your monitors being adjustable, the desk, your laptop stand or keyboard, the chair itself. So having adjustable options is a great idea. Fitted mouses, keyboards, or other equipment similar, like your peripherals. Wrist supports, lumbar support, neck support, standing desks, as opposed to your regular desk, right? Having a desk that's adjustable or standing, so that you can go between sitting and standing, is a great idea. And I've gone extensively over breaks, so I won't go too far, much more deep into breaks. But one thing to mention is that eye specialists do recommend, there's a very specific rule called the 20-20-20 rule, and this is for eye strain, and to reduce that eye strain is at least every 20 minutes taking a 20-second break and looking at something 6 meters or 20 feet out, could give your not only your brain a rest, but your eyes as well, just from staring at the screen for long periods. And then last but not least, stretching before, during, and after work is always going to be a recommendation. Now, for sake of time, I won't cover everything in this next section, but general industry tools, you want to look at tools that suit your individual workers' needs. So I already mentioned like low vibration. That's something to consider. Lighter weight materials in your tools, handles that fit the worker's individual needs, automate tasks wherever it's applicable and possible. Same thing with job rotation. And train your workers on ergonomic principles and applicable techniques for their job. So if it's lifting, reaching, pushing, pulling, there are correct techniques for that, all of which are available. All of which are an option to train your workers in, and you very much should train your workers in those things. And the last thing I want to cover, and this is kind of just to address everything that we've talked about, is taking care of your physical and mental health. Recognizing those signs of overload and burnout early and talking about it to someone can help. Same thing on the side of your traditional ergonomics. You start to feel those, the pains, tingling, numbness. Recognize things early and make sure you let your employer know, right? So talk to your manager. Worst case, if it gets to a point where you're really struggling, whether you've brought it up to your manager or not, you may need to seek medical and professional help. But I would strongly suggest go to your manager first and see what the company can do.
Perfect. I do want to acknowledge we're at almost 30 minutes. We do have a little bit more to share. We're going to keep going, so appreciate if anybody needs to drop. As I said, we are recording, so you will get the rest of the session that you can watch at your leisure, but hopefully you can stick around with us for a few more minutes. We did want to talk about a hot topic. We got a lot of questions about this in advance. How this all applies to hybrid and remote work. So many people are spending at least some of their time working from home or some other remote locations from time to time. So what, if anything, is different in that scenario?
Not much, honestly, not much, except that it's just a little more difficult to manage, just them not being directly in an office with you. But due diligence still applies, right? The fact that the worker is working from home doesn't change the due diligence requirement as for the employer. So it's no different in that sense. Like I said, it is a challenge when a worker is working in their own private home. You may want to revisit your policies that you've already put in place to decide how you as the employer will maintain health and safety in the worker's private residence. It should be in a written agreement with the remote worker, as well as in any overall program policy documents. One option you can reserve is the right to inspect the worker's home office periodically to make sure that it meets all required health and safety standards. You want to consider providing workers with proper equipment and furniture to minimize the risk of workplace strain or injury. And how will the worker be trained, and what knowledge are they provided? Right. And lastly, who is responsible for what in the program? Right. All of those things detailed in a policy and in an agreement between you and the worker can really set you up for success. Musculoskeletal disorders at home are considered the same as in any other workplace, and it's considered a workplace injury. But again, it's important to make it very clear in any signed agreement between you and the worker what is considered a work-related task versus not. So like walking up and down their stairs to go grab their lunch in their own home, that can be detailed very specifically as that is not considered a work related task, right? So making it very clear what they're doing as part of their job will help you really narrow down, like, is this a work related injury, right? And it is very important to train your workers to report workplace injuries as soon as they occur or symptoms are recognized, to give you the best chance to address that concern as soon as possible. And that takes us to our next points here.
Yeah, for sure. So those are great reminders for remote team members. But what other best practices can you share for that can apply to all workers, regardless of where they may work?
Yeah, for sure. Identifying your stakeholders is important, right? Knowing who to go to and who affects your program at work. So influencers like the government, any regulators or organizations that set any best practice at a national or regional level is important to identify those people. Your decision makers, so who in the organization is responsible for making decisions on requirements for the design of your systems and your processes, that kind of thing. Your experts, so professional ergonomic specialists, engineers, psychologists, now that we're talking more about that cognitive side of things, can all contribute to how you design your processes, your tools, your equipment, all those things. And it's all based on their professional backgrounds. And the workers, of course, impact, and they're all part of your system, and they directly affect the way it's designed and by who. So yeah, it definitely is important to recognize who those people are so that you know who to collaborate with and who's affected. Very important, provide information, tools, assessments, and training. Training workers on ergonomic principles, applications, and how to identify hazards and how to report and address those hazards correctly is very important. Assess your workplace, right? So again, I'm not going to get too deep into what kind of assessments you can do, but there are a few, and I'll just cover them high level here. But there's things like the rapid entire body assessment that basically uses the worker's position of their upper, mid, lower parts of their body, and how much force is applied to the worker, and assigns a score to each assessed body part, and it gives you a total score of high, medium, and low level risk. So think risk assessment, but you're assessing your body's ergonomics. You can do physical demand analysis, which is just breaking down all of your individual jobs and tasks, and assessing the environment and identifying any physical demand. So how much force is required to do that thing, or how many times do I have to repeat it, in what amount of time, and in what posture is my body in when I'm doing that. And lastly, office ergonomics and self-assessments. When you're thinking that work from home scenario where it's difficult to assess their workplace, self-assessments are a great option, just to assign to the worker, or even a virtual assessment or a virtual inspection of their workplace. So showing them over a camera, getting them to show you as the employer over the camera is also an option. Right? Again, convey the importance of reporting injuries and ergonomic hazards as soon as they occur or are identified. investigate all your injuries, musculoskeletal disorders, and address those identified concerns. Document everything. So whenever you've completed an assessment, implemented a control, trained, whenever you're training and giving workers information, reporting injuries or concerns, whenever there's policies or procedures that you've put in place, all of those things should be documented, not only to prove to another governing body, but to your workers that you've done your due diligence and you care about their well-being. It's important to document everything. Okay. And then reevaluate controls ongoing, right? Incorporate into your workplace inspections a review of their work from home setups to make sure that the conditions remain safe. So scheduling recurring self-assessments might be needed, but all of which these are things that you should definitely consider. And when when you don't have the resources, right? You don't have the staff to be able to organize these things and train people, and you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the tools in place. Just know that there are third-party professionals available to assist, and you should call somebody in as a third party to assist you. And that takes us to how some of the things we can do to help. Just to give you one idea, we do have tools in our system for SOP creation, so safe operating procedures. Say you've gone through your assessment, you've identified all those ergonomic hazards and risks, you've put controls in place, you have a very specific safe way that the job needs to be done. You can create that safe operating procedure in our platform for workers to review and sign off on and use. So it's important to note that for sure. We also have completed assessments can be stored in our platform, sent for review on recurring schedules, requires acknowledgement or sign off that they've completed them or reviewed, right? You can access checklists that we have available for workplace inspections and ergonomics, and they can be handled the same way. Accessing other things, like, so we do have training available that covers ergonomics principles and how to identify those risks. So, and that's just a few things, right? Our platform has a lot more that we can do to help support this part of your program and help you with ergonomics.
Perfect. So let's wrap it up with some key takeaways before we get into some questions. So ergonomics is not optional, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so ergonomics is not optional, meaning, again, we've mentioned due diligence a couple times here. It's not an option. This is the law, right? New and exciting time in history here. I mentioned, especially on the cognitive side of things, this is new, right? This is something that we're only recognizing now. And it's a good opportunity to recognize best practice and try and streamline that across what we do and across industries. So it is definitely new and exciting. Management is within reach. I've just noted a couple different things there, right? Through assessments, using third party, right? Our platform. These are all tools available to you to help manage ergonomics in your workplace. So it is definitely within reach and doesn't have to be looked at as this huge, daunting, impossible task. And we can help. So again, coming back to, you can create safe operating procedures in our platform assigned to workers that they need to read, review, understand, sign off on, and follow, right? Checklists. You can literally create your own workplace inspection checklists in our platform and assign it to workers on a recurring schedule. You can do the same with assessments that have been completed or need to be completed, right? So the platform is so powerful, and we can help you manage ergonomics.
Absolutely. Now, I know we have a few questions. Thanks to those who have stuck with us. We'll try to get through a few of these before we let you go. And just a reminder that, sometimes questions can be a bit nuanced. So, Aaron's going to do his best with the limited knowledge we have from this, but you should obviously always consult. If you're a client, consult our team for help. If you're not a client yet, reach out and learn how we can help you. But to start us off, some questions around how often this should be looked at. So how often should we review workspaces?
Yeah, and this doesn't change for home office. Again, we recognize that a private home is also considered a workplace. So with workplace inspections, at least annually, going over so the home office, in the case of home office, or in the workplace, going over ergonomics as part of your workplace inspection annually. You can do it more frequently than that. Honestly, if you're asking me, I suggest doing it maybe semi-annually, so at least there's something in between to catch if there's anything changed, instead of the whole year. But at least once a year is important to at least do that. Hiring a new worker that will be in that environment and using the equipment or doing those tasks, then you should do another assessment because there's a new worker there. Or if anything changes in the work environment or in the equipment, then you should also be doing another assessment.
Makes sense. And this is a pretty common one. What about workstations that are used by more than one employee? So there might be different shifts, or maybe it's like a hotel workstation scenario. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, shift to shift doesn't really, I don't think, affect much of a factor. It's more so like person to person, right? Different heights, sizes. That's going to make a different factor. It plays a bigger factor there. And as well as individual needs, if they have like some kind of disability or something along those lines, it may become a little more difficult. But in general, adjustable equipment is pretty key, and identifying those individual needs of the worker so that that the adjustable equipment you're providing works for that worker. So one thing is knowing the correct postures to sit. It's pretty much all you need to know to correctly adjust all of your equipment to match that worker's needs. And in cases where there's major differences between those workers, you might have to purchase their own equipment or give them their own workstation to accommodate for their individual needs.
Right. To that point, another question that's come in is around what are the good postures to sit, and especially when you're working at a computer, how should your hands be positioned? Can you give us any tips on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and this goes a little deeper, right? It goes as far as how far is the monitor away from you and at what height. So this gets very in depth. So I'm just going to keep it at as far as what is a good posture to be seated, and that's feet flat on the floor. Your knees should be about the same height as your hips. So think like 90 degrees, almost like the way that your legs would look from your thighs to your shins. Your lower back should have some kind of lumbar support. So like a cushion, or some chairs have it built right into the chair. The lower part of your arm, so think your wrists, forearms, your hands, those should be in line with each other. So straight, not curved or up on an angle. They should be all in line in a neutral position. Your shoulders should be relaxed and either supported by an armrest like mine are right now, or relaxed at your sides to where it's not, you don't feel any strain to have to hold your shoulders up. Having a small space between the front edge of your chair, and the back of your knees, or rather your calf, having about an inch or two of space between the edge of your chair and that part of your leg. And make sure you have enough space on your chair width-wise as well. So about an inch or two on either side, either edge of your chair, so that you can fully sit on your chair. That's pretty well considered a neutral position for your body to be in.
Perfect. And we had one other one come in that I think I can probably assume the answer to, but just around, what if you do all these things and you encourage these things and you recommend that they take breaks, but your employee doesn't? I assume you're going to say that's why you document everything. But do you mind answering that one?
Yeah. You've definitely said that one. Due diligence, you're required. So document everything is very important, just in case that does arrive where a worker is just not following. But that, like any other policy or procedure, that's something you can challenge your worker on and say, look, you are required to do these things. It's not an option, right? We've assessed your workplace. We provided you the tools. We have the policy in place, and we've shown you how to do your job safely. You're choosing not to do that. That's grounds for progressive discipline at the very least. Or if it results in them becoming injured, or they put in a claim somehow, that's for you now to say, we've done our due diligence. We've done all these things. We've done the assessments. We've given them the equipment. They've been trained. They knew all of this, and that's kind of your defense there. But definitely grounds for progressive discipline.
Perfect. I know we're coming up on a little bit over what we had hoped. So thank you again for sticking with us. I think we'll have to end it there. I know some other questions came in. We'll do our best. If you, like I said, if you're a client, reach out to us. We'll be happy to answer any additional questions that you have. And if you're not yet a client, do reach out and, we'll see what we can do to help you. So yeah, Erin's already pointed out some ways Citation Canada can help if you're looking to review ergonomics in your workplace. In general, if you want to up-level your health and safety practices, as he mentioned, our solution supports risk assessments, safe operating procedures, provides tools and documents to guide you through these requirements. And as I mentioned, we have our safety consultants like Erin available to help you along the way. So reach out if you'd like to learn more about that. And we just want to thank you again for a little bit of extra time today. Thanks for coming. We hope that you'll come back for our next webinar as well. So we'll be back in September discussing pay transparency. So we'll be looking at the existing and upcoming requirements around it, depending on your jurisdiction. And more importantly, why it's something that all employers should be thinking about, regardless of location, industry, or company size. So you'll get this recording this week, and you'll also see an email from us soon with more information about that next webinar and a link to sign up. So until then, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for coming, Erin. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.